Welcome to this edition of American Purpose. My name is Jack Moline. I am president of Interfaith Alliance. 60 years ago, Henry Luce, publisher of Life magazine, invited 10 prominent men, each to compose an essay on the national purpose. Then, as now, there was a sense that we stood at the beginning of a time of cultural and political change. Our project expands on this work as each episode explores one perspective on where our nation was, where it is, and where it should be going. And we do that with a contemporary thought leader. My guests are from the worlds of faith, government, politics, and culture, and they have generously agreed to spend this time with us. You can find out more about Interfaith Alliance and our mission to protect your faith and freedom at interfaithalliance.org, and by listening to our radio program, State of Belief, at stateofbelief.com. But right now, let's find out more about the American purpose with my guest, Senator Tammy Baldwin. Welcome, Senator.
I am so delighted to join you.
Thank you so much. So, the American trajectory has really two stories. One of them starts with our founding fathers and is a very philosophical one. And the other is on the ground, which is a lot of different people coming from a lot of different places to make this nation. You typify that second trajectory. You have a whole variety of influences that led you to sort of an unexpected career in public service, right?
Absolutely. If I look at my background and my life experiences, I feel like I developed a calling, and it's certainly not divorced from our founding fathers and their visions, but it takes on many of the contemporary issues that they didn't discuss at great length or even at all in some cases. So, but I think it's true to much of what they were endeavoring at that time.
Well, what is it that you think was the original national purpose of the United States?
Well, I think it's what was expressed in the Declaration of Independence. And I think that our founders, in some ways, were specific, and in some ways were purposely vague, knowing that they couldn't know the future. And so, for example, the protection of rights, certain rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that implies that there would be many other rights, individual rights, that would be contemplated at a future point in time. And we often look at the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, and often don't read it all the way through because we're so pleased with the words and the sentiments at the beginning. But when it gets into America and the idea of America, because we are both a country and an idea, and why we form government and what government is expected to do, sort of ends with a restatement of the concept of happiness and also safety. And so I think one of the things we struggle with is a contemporary view of what the word happiness means versus what the founders were really thinking, which most scholars, I think, would suggest is not an individual moment of happiness, but an idea that generationally we improve opportunities and the opportunity to thrive and flourish and progress.
And we're also debating what the meaning of safety is as well. That's a very different concept now than it used to be.
There's no question about it. And, we're discussing this during once in a century global pandemic. Let's hope that it's once in a century.
Kidding.
And so often we think about uh, security in terms of national security vis-a-vis other countries in the world. In this case, we're really having to profoundly think of government responsibility for safety where the enemy is a virus and the rest of the world is struggling with us.
So, what is the American purpose going forward if it isn't exactly what it was when the founders were writing about it?
Well, I think that you can use their purposely vague words and stick with them. So safety and happiness, again, I don't believe they meant the contemporary usage of the word happiness, but this idea that we, with every generation, are trying to secure community happiness, which means the opportunity for each of us, sometimes through our government, sometimes not, to build community that allows us to thrive and flourish. And some contemporary thinkers have expressed that, with the advancement of science, we have ways to talk about and measure there are measurables with regard to having whether government is succeeding or not at creating the foundation for flourishing and thriving. And we ought to, if we can get greater consensus around what those opportunities to thrive and flourish are, we ought to be able to measure whether government is doing it effectively or not in different areas. And that would be, I think, something that could really bring people together in ways that we haven't seen in a long time.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So there's more than one value which is foundational in the United States. You've spoken about happiness. Is there another value or two that you would consider to be foundational that we've been either pursuing or should have been pursuing all along?
Well, certainly the idea of equality. And I think that more and more frequently today we are, I wouldn't say replacing it with the thought of equity, but challenging ourselves to talk about both equality and equity at the same time, because they are complementary but fundamentally different in many regards. And so I certainly think that everybody has a common understanding of the idea of equality, but we have work to do in terms of thinking about equity, which relates also to this discussion on community happiness and the ability to thrive and flourish.
And how about foundational values, or at least values on which the country was founded, that we might want to reconsider altogether these days?
Oh my. Well, I wouldn't say that that one of our founding values was kindness, respect, and civility. I would say that because the founders were talking about the governed having power and not having a king, that we have a level of perhaps informality and sometimes incivility that should be, I think, re-examined. That we have, it seems, lost all ability to disagree agreeably and to have an exchange of ideas without shooting the messenger, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of discourse and ability to listen to people you disagree with and ideas you disagree with, and feel free to express yourself without threat of violence or defamation, that seems to have been lacking. This is my Wisconsin understatement. It's lacking, and we could certainly sort of see how we could rebuild that.
We certainly have at least claimed that we live in the most uncivil times in our history. You and I both know that in the history of your esteemed institution, there have been plenty of opportunities where people have taken advantage of their bully pulpits to bully people. So,
Yes.
But you're right, we are looking hard to reclaim this notion of civility and an appreciation of each other rather than immediate suspicion of each other.
That's right. And, you know, one of the ways in which our nation and world have advanced is how we communicate and how rapidly somebody using their bully pulpit in such a demeaning way becomes household news rather than something that you'd wait a week to read the transcript of in the paper. So that role modeling on behalf of my colleagues and others who have the privilege of being leaders is a big deal.
So most of our constitutional guarantees, and certainly the ones we've been talking about, have emphasized our commonality. There's sort of a collective sense that we're all in this together. But the very first freedom in the Bill of Rights is very personal. It's the freedom of religion, or I think more accurately, the freedom of conscience. What values that are rooted in your own personal belief system do you commend to those who might not share your particular beliefs?
That's such a great question, and perhaps I can share a little bit more of the sort of family background from which my belief system, or where it's rooted. And that was having so many religious traditions in my family tree. And I could go branch by branch, but let me just summarize it.
Stick with the root.
Saying that I was raised by my maternal grandparents. My grandfather was Jewish. He and my grandmother met in England, where she was raised, and she was from an Anglican family. And my father's side of the family contains this incredibly long line of United Methodist clergy members. The closest to me would have been my great-grandfather, but then his father and his father before him. So that was a part of my making. And I also would note that my mother's second husband came from a family where most of his siblings had converted to Islam. And so their family at a young age, I was 9 when she remarried, also had a big impact on me. But when I think of my core belief systems, I think with that background, there's so much room in my mind for me to listen to and learn from all the great religious traditions, as well as from people who don't necessarily find their own spiritual nurture from organized religion, if we'll call it that way. And it does, I think, make it more difficult for me to understand and persuade people who are so rigid in their views that no other view or set of practices or spiritual nourishment is acceptable to them. And I don't know that I hold the key to persuading some of those individuals to understand that while we cherish the First Amendment, we also live in a very, a very diverse society, and we should aim to become a more inclusive, not just diverse society.
You move very comfortably among lots of different communities. Part of that is that Wisconsin nice that you were talking about, but also you just are natively comfortable almost anywhere you turn. It's one of the things I think that has made you a popular figure in a state that has sometimes its divisive issues as well. How, Senator, do you think we ought to be pursuing a national purpose? How should we be talking about pulling together on where we should be going?
Yeah. Well, I think we need more discussion and conversation to see if you pull back from people engaging in that discussion with their partisan labels or their ideological labels, and just seeing what degree of consensus there is around the idea of government protecting those key values, our safety, and our community, providing the opportunity for communities to improve and thrive and flourish generation after generation after generation. What are those key components? Then I think we can take advantage of the fact that we've moved far enough ahead to make those measurable, not just qualitative discussions, but quantitative discussions. So, for example, if community happiness has to do with good health and good health care, access to it, educational attainment, when it has to do with greater economic equity and opportunity, then I think you can actually have a conversation about, are we getting those jobs done through government? And the Declaration kind of urges us that if we're not, we should alter it. Sometimes abolish it. I'm not suggesting that, but there's various forms of alteration. Voting in elections can alter the decision makers and who are the governors in the small g sense. But there's other ways to hold ourselves more accountable to pursuing the national purpose.
So one of the ways that you've chosen is to work your way through various levels of government. You had the good fortune to serve locally, and then you served your district, and now you have this national post that brings you certain power and certain notoriety. But not everybody in the United States is going to be part of representative government. How does the individual play a role in pursuing a national purpose? And of course, casting a vote. But beyond that, what does each of us need to do in pursuit of this national purpose?
Well, there's so many ways to offer up suggestions on that. Let us assume that one of our specific national purposes right now would be to protect a planet and our part of influencing that planet for future generations, to make sure that our water is clean and drinkable, that our air is safe to breathe, that we haven't damaged the planet in terms of climate patterns so much that the next generation will suffer. There's been certainly a lot of national failure to address that issue. But there's so much opportunity for us to break it down into what could be done through state government, what could be done through local government, and what can each individual, each family, each neighborhood, each community do outside of government to make a positive impact and to contribute. The idea, that's one idea. There's, I think, a trend, given the fact that one of our values in the U.S. has been, hard work, determination, and the work hours have gotten longer, et cetera, that we don't have as many people volunteering in the community through and taking direct action to alleviate or help make their communities stronger and create greater opportunities for communities to thrive. Whether that's tutoring or donating food to a food pantry and helping distribute it, whether it's neighborhood cleanups, or just the things that build community that have nothing to do with ideology or party, but that help people take direct, and I'd argue at least somewhat political action to address where we've fallen short in protecting safety and happiness in all parts of our society.
I will tell you that's an answer that is remarkably similar to what was in the book 60 years ago that inspired these conversations. So let me ask you one more question before we thank you for your time and let you go. Are you optimistic about America's future?
Well, the answer is yes, but oftentimes optimism and hopefulness are interchanged. I would tell you I'm extremely hopeful about America's future. For me, optimism almost feels a little bit more like, what are the odds that X will happen or Y will happen in the next week or the next month or the next generation, right? I don't have a clear sense of time or timeline, but yes, I'm optimistic, but very hopeful.
Very glad to hear it. Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, thank you so much for spending this time with us today to talk about the American purpose. And thanks to you, our listeners, for engaging with us in exploring the American purpose. It's been an honor and a pleasure to spend this time with Senator Tammy Baldwin, who has so generously shared her perspective. You can listen to this and other episodes at AmericanPurpose.org and learn more about our work at InterfaithAlliance.org and stateofbelief.com. Interfaith Alliance has produced this program under the guidance of Ray Kirstein. I am Jack Moline, encouraging you to live with purpose.